Okay, here we are getting started on our strip deck for the Kaholo 14. We're in the Gray Whale Trading Company workshop, and we've got the hull built and set aside here with some of the strips. And on the worktop, we've got a whole set of strips laid out for one half of the deck. So unlike typical strip construction, instead of building over strong backs, because the deck of the board is flat, we're building the deck flat on the bench top. So I'm going to be building basically a right half and then a left half, and then those halves will be joined when the underside is glassed. So what we've done here, because we're not, to save using extra tools and doing, you might say, a fancier or more complicated setup, such as cutting scarf joints for the joints in the middle of these, we're actually going to use butt joints and simply butt each one up to another. And to facilitate some strength along with that, we have marked lines on our worktop about 1.5 inches apart. So each subsequent set of strips will be offset about 1.5 inches from the other. So while we're doing a butt joint, we're actually doing a staggered butt joint, which will give us substantially more strength. Of course, once it's glassed and mounted on the board, the strength is really not a particular issue, although just to be safe, the intent is to place this butt joint over the number 6 bulkhead on the board. So the way it is right now, we have two 8-foot strips covering most of the board, and then we have a single 8-foot strip that'll be out on the rail, because of course we don't need the full length out on the rail. So with that, we're going to get started in putting these things together. It should be a simple method. We're basically going in a longitudinal line from tail to nose on the board for all the strips. In other words, no bending around the edges. We're trying to emulate more of a traditional surfboard style, which would typically have straight stringers and straight wood laminations. So that's what we'll be doing here on our Kaholo 14 strip deck. So we've got our bottle of Tight Bond number 3 over here that we'll be using for our gluing task. And with that, we're going to get started here in just a couple of minutes. Okay, we're on to the next step here. We're going to start putting together the strips in just a moment, but we don't want to forget the fact that in the Gray Whale Trading Company workshop, almost no work gets done without a little help from Rockstar Recovery Drink. No sugar, a little caffeine, lots of good taste, and here we go. So, with that, we're going to set this up, and you're going to watch me start putting this strip deck together. Okay, here we go. Now, one of the things that is interesting to note is that we have the center strips of the board, the ones that right now are abutted against this 1x3, which is clamped to the worktop, just for the sake of a guide. The two center stringers are beaded on one side and the cove has been removed on the other. So after we've built this half of the deck and we go to join them, we'll basically have a single butt joint down the middle. This is done so that we have the bead facing out on both sides of the board, so that later when we round the rails of the board, we'll end up with a symmetrical look from side to side. So, and of course that butt joint wouldn't be particularly strong except for the fact that it will be fiberglassed on both sides, and again, the whole thing will be supported by the network of stringers and bulkheads in the board itself. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to put a little glue on the end of this so that we can butt it against the other center piece. And the glue is on it, so lay this back on the table. And I added a little wax paper here, of course, so that I wouldn't glue these to the guide. And we have a polyethylene painting type sheeting plastic underneath the stringers themselves. So with a little luck, we're going to be able to stand this stringer up, maybe with the help of another one next to it, so that we can put a bead of glue down it. And this is it, the first bead of glue. Looks like in addition to the support stringer, we're going to have to hold it a little bit by hand as well to do this solo. Obviously, like many things on these projects, if you have an extra set of hands, it never hurts to have those available. So, onward we go here. And luckily we have a fairly warm day for middle of winter in Sacramento. I think we're probably 60 or above. So that's kind of nice. A week ago when I was out here to get this going, it was 46 in the canopy midday, and that's a little bit cold to be working, and I'm pretty sure the glue isn't going to like that either. So let's see here. 8 foot of a small bead is a pretty good distance to go, as you can see. So, but I'm very certain that the little bit of extra tedium in building this deck is going to be well worth it in an aesthetic payoff. So we're getting close here. I suppose as I move along here, I'll probably speed up just a little bit. Otherwise, it'll be a very long project. Okay, so we got that first strip glued. Now remember, this one, which you probably can't see because we're not close enough right now, but this is going to be about 1.5 inches offset from the one right next to it. And I'm going to push this in snug all the way down. You can see that our guide board doesn't go the entire length here. However, we have on the ends of the table, we have a clamp so that we can push against those clamps to make sure that we have something to push against to keep these things snug together. Another drink of Rockstar. Again, that's pretty key to the whole project here. Pretty sure that without the Rockstar, none of this would actually happen. So, now we're going to put its adjacent strip, and I'm going to go ahead and use this other little piece here again as sort of a support, but it's only a marginal support. And then we have to remember to put a little glue on the ends of this, the butt joint itself. So we're going to start at this far end, probably out of the camera by now. So we'll aim this just a little bit over this way and put a small bead. It doesn't take a ton of glue in this little bead because it's actually a very snug fit in the cove of the opposing piece. Oops, there we go, tipping it over. Not sure how far the glue will go, but we've got a pretty good size bottle here to start with. Let's see, looks like a 16 ouncer. And although I was a little concerned about handling the 16 ounce bottle, because it has a V-shaped tip, it very nicely travels down the cove side of this strip here. And you got to watch out, every once in a while you get a little splinter on there, and we don't want the splinters keeping this from mating up properly. So make sure if you have a splinter crossed over your cove, you pull it out. And we're getting near the end of the second piece here. And again, we have to make sure we get a little on the end where it abuts the one in front of it. So, again, we work our way down, squeeze these little babies together. And maybe tighten our clamp a little here, as I see it's loosened up just a tiny bit. Keep these as snug as we can, and then after I get a certain number of them done, we'll support them, lay something flat on them over wax paper, plus put pressure against to hold them all together. And we'll just continue on that way for a bit. Okay, so what we've done now is we've just used nearly 16 ounces of our glue to glue 32 total strips. So it looks like we're using a fair amount of glue. So before we can put the final about 4 inches on, which will be the rail section, we will have to get more glue. In the meantime, make sure that nothing's out of place. We've put some pressure on the strips against the support block, put small nails to keep that pushed together, put some wax paper with some wood and weights on top to keep everything flat, and everything can sit here and sort of begin to set up. We'll get the additional glue, we'll come back and we'll finish the 8-foot strips for another 4 inches out, and then this half of the deck will basically be finished as far as the glue up goes, and then we'll move on from there. So we'll take a little break here and get what we need and then finish. Okay, and one final step to try and create some sort of neatness and to prevent having to sand too much excess glue off. We've got a pretty wet cloth here, and we're going to wipe down the glue, which of course when it's dry is completely waterproof, but at this stage it still can be cleaned up with water. So we've got all the pieces for one half of the deck together, and we're going to, you might say, clamp them in place utilizing both the small nails that I had put in earlier in some areas, some of which I had to pull to finish the job. And and then in addition, of course, we want to keep everything flat so that it mates up properly. And so we've got the wax paper with the pieces of wood and the weights to facilitate that. And we'll replace this middle one with now a longer piece, and we'll be good to go. So we'll let this baby dry off, and then we'll maybe tomorrow start on the other half. Before long we'll have the full deck, and then we'll probably lay it on the board, draw the shape of the board, and rough cut the fit, and then go from there to finish the deck. So for now, adieu. Okay, so resuming with the strip deck Kaholo project. At this point in time, the second half of the deck is basically done. Still in its little jigs and things. What I've done is I've used nails periodically along the outer edge to keep everything tight, pushed up against the 1x3 strip, which is my guide. At the end of my work table I have a clamp at each end because the 1x3 was not long enough to go the entire distance. So in addition, I've got weights strategically placed across the top on wax paper with wood so that everything stays nice and flat. And you can see that we have the original half, the first half we did, is actually setting on the hull of the board right now in approximately its correct location, in that the one edge, the flat edge, the edge of strip that had the cove part removed, is now in the center of the board and will butt against the other half in the center as well. So as you can see, we've got a fair amount of excess off the tail end here. Some of that actually will become the tail block of this board. So at this point, we're going to now continue removing all of the guides and weights and things from this half. We'll basically have the two halves. I did learn something on the first half, and that is that laying on the polyethylene plastic, the glue had a strong tendency to stick to the plastic, made it very difficult to lift it off. So on this one, I actually put wax paper over the polyethylene plastic, and I suspect that's going to work better. So we're going to find out here in just a few minutes.